Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Had a really cool review for you guys from the brand TUUL watches. Now, they are an enthusiast-founded, Brooklyn-based independent watch company with a deep passion for, yep, you guessed it, the TUUL watch. Now, with the goal of creating timepieces that are actually meant to be worn and are capable of both inspiring adventure from behind your desk and also withstanding those adventures while out in the wild. Now, a great starting point, of course, for a new brand like this would be that classic field watch space. Some key characteristics and design language, and you're looking for something within this genre. You're going to want, of course, more modest / vintage style sizing. You're going to want to find Arabic numeral scales, whether they be 12 or 24 hours or both. And of course, typically, classically, you would find these in either a black or a cream dial. Now, this is their Filthy 13 in stainless steel with a white dial, and it's meant to be an evolution of the iconic Dirty Dozen watches. Preserving the classic field watch aesthetic, they've utilized the trademark features of the originals, such as a railroad minute track and sub-second style, while introducing unique dial variations and case materials. Built on the bedrock of reliability, functionality, and durability, the Filthy 13, like its heroic namesake, carries a traditional story and purpose. Equipped to handle more than a bit of grit and grime, it's a watch made not only to tell time, but to withstand the test of time. These go for $899.99 direct, and that's in the steel case variation as seen, or you can get them for $1,099.99 in bronze. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with this piece. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, so really classic and simplistic layout you're gonna find here. Nothing too earth-shattering, but what they do to manage to do is just kind of give you something that just feels right. It doesn't feel like it was made to be different just for the sake of being different, and it also doesn't feel just like a carbon copy of anything else, while still maintaining a very, very recognizable and classic design aesthetic. Now, getting into the dimensions, 38 millimeters in diameter, which is fantastic, 11.5 millimeters thin, and 46 millimeters lug to lug. So very, very wearable, not the smallest, not the largest, but I think proportions are great for this particular design. Also, the stainless steel that's here, it's 316 L stainless steel, and you're also getting this in a full matte bead blasted finish, so nice and bright. And although of course matte blasted means that it's typically going to be a little bit more dull, you can see that the particular blasting they did does have a nice brightness to it, and then also you can see that there's still nice contrasting lines in terms of the way that the light is going to reflect off of the matte surface, and I think it all comes together really nicely. Think something similar to like a Hamilton Khaki Field, but I would say even more of a bit of a refined look and a fineness and less gritty blasted than you would find on some of those more traditional options. The crystal is a flat sapphire with an inner AR, and you guys can see here, nice and flat, which is what keeps it thin. The crown is nicely signed, and it does have a screw down crown, so that's another nice feature. That's because this actually has an automatic movement, which is great. Swiss Lita SW261-1, so it has a 41-hour power reserve, beats at 4 hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour in terms of the beat rate, and it's also been modified to where there's no ghost date position, so when you are pulling out the crown after you unscrew it, it's just going to be the single click when you're hacking it, which is quite nice. Also getting into the dial details themselves here, guys, very simple. It's a matte white dial, no date, almost like a pale silvery tone to it though. So I would say it almost has like an opaline-esque type of vibe in terms of the white. So it's not like a stark or glossy or anything like that. So it actually comes across as very, very just a cool, again, it's not a traditional white dial. It just has that light, pale silver tone to it. Visually, of course, it's going to render white, but I'd say the more you look at it, the more you're going to realize it's actually kind of nicer and more interesting than that. Also, you're going to notice that you do have that recessed small second subdial, which does have the concentric circling in terms of the texturing there. Everything is painted, including the hands, which is going to be great for contrast. And they're going to be using an unspecified Swiss Superluminova, and they're using a couple different ones too, because the black index is actually loomed as well, which is a big surprise. I know black loom isn't the brightest loom that's out there, but it's nice that they even did that, because most brands would have just had, of course, the loom plops be the loom plops, and then they would have just done that indexing in just regular black ink. Also, with that screw down crown, you're getting 100 meters of water resistance, or 10 atmospheres. You have 20 millimeter lugs that are drilled, which is great. And then you have it on your choice of this beautiful khaki nylon military NATO style strap. This was the khaki colorway. You can also get it in a green or a black, I believe. And yeah, this thing is pretty nice. A traditional dual pass setup that's about 11 inches long, which, you know, is a little bit kind of in an in-between outside of my sweet spot. I typically would prefer something around 10 or less, or 13 or longer, just so I'll either have not enough to kind of loop it back through, or I'll have enough to where I can loop it and fold it back. But again, that's just unique to my particular wrist size. I think this 11 inch 280 millimeter length is going to be, you know, super popular and very mainstream, and hit a more so a sweet spot for others. But just on my own wrists, yeah, I could have went for either a shorter one or a longer one, and it probably would have worked better. But with all that said, let's actually get this on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this wears beautifully. Even though it is that traditional dual pass layout, that ribbed nylon is actually quite thin while still feeling quite robust. So it's not going to elevate the watch, and the watch is already pretty thin. And you can see also it has really great drape to those lugs, the curvature. So although the lugs aren't, you know, impressively short, I think they're a perfect size at, what was it, 46 millimeters lug to lug, which is going to be pretty dialed in for a lot of folks. So I think it looks fantastic. First, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to get a bit of perspective distortion, and you know, it's going to look a little bit larger. You can see it's kind of protruding there, almost jumping off the wrist. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low here, and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can still get a detailed look, but just add a bit of a true aspect ratio as to how this may sit on your own wrist. And you can see very, very nicely centered. And then for those of you with larger wrists like myself, the nice thing is when you're wearing it on a pass-through style strap with the hardware on either side of the wrist, it does help give you a bit more visual presence and visual punch. Of course, you guys see, not ideal for me in terms of the length, because there's not enough to fold back and catch, but there's also just a little bit more than I would like hanging out. So I could turn it inward, but it is, again, it's kind of in that awkward in-between phase. The good news is that I can put this on any other strap, because it's actually made for this. So I'm passing this through, and if you guys are fans of my Instagram, if you're not following, please go ahead and take the time to go do that now. I've already worn this on a really cool Haviston strap that's a single pass. It's a little bit thicker, but since it's single pass, it actually is thinner ultimately in terms of the way that it's going to wear, and it just fits absolutely perfectly. And of course, with this thematic layout, it's very versatile, you know, with the white, with the hints of kind of that yellow tone, of course with the black high contrast indexing. So it just really works, does the job. And I have to say, it's just one of those things that although super simple, it just hits the sweet spot, and it's just very, very clean. You guys can see that nice logo there, very handsome. But you know what? Let's go ahead, and before we get into closing thoughts, I thought maybe it would be nice to check out the packaging, because this is a new brand, so it's not like everybody understands kind of the TUUL standard. And check that out. Speaking of standard, this is a very high one, especially considering how nice this piece is. Check that out. So really nice Pelican style case. It has the airlock and everything like that. You can lock it if you wanted to, because you have these holes here, but we can see, check that out. Very, very nice. You got your card, you have your tool here that's included, so you're going to have two ends. One side is a punch, of course, with those drilled lugs. That's going to be very useful, and the other side should be a spring bar removal end. Again, also very convenient and useful. Nicely knurled here for the grips, and I think a nice size. Also, in case you couldn't see it, check that out. Nicely signed as well with the TUUL T. Also, one thing that I thought was pretty neat that I kind of dug around for is this is a relatively deep case, and the cool thing is they actually do have a secondary insert here so that you can store anything a little bit lower, like an extra strap or something like that. So I thought that was really, really cool. And yeah, I dig when brands do those little things that, you know, people don't necessarily ask for, but you're always relatively excited to kind of have come your way. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool, guys. A little sidetrack there, but hey, I thought, why not share, especially for a new brand. But with that said, let's actually get this piece off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, check it out, guys. Of course, now the black loom is going to fade faster than your traditional loom, but I think it's cool that they actually do even show that. But, you know, we can optimize this a little bit by getting a little black light on there. Check that out. Ooh. So hopefully that'll supercharge us a bit just for the video. Check it out. Very, very cool. Again, it's not something that is very common, but when it happens, when you see it, I have to say I do appreciate it. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And I have to say, this one is very, very cool. You can see even while you still have some green loom coming through on the black index, that it's still quite high contrast, which is great. And again, the nice thing is when you get that full-on direct sunlight, it's going to render very, very white, bright, and high contrast. But then, you know, you start mixing the lighting conditions and you get to appreciate a little bit more of that kind of matte opaline finish, which I think looks really cool. And again, it just adds an extra dimension to a relatively simplistic design. You know, everything's printed, everything's flat, but the nice thing is the color play, the level of contrast, it just adds more dimension, and I think makes it a little bit more visually interesting, especially when you have it on you know, a strap like you have here. You have that extra bit of hardware, and even though that is just a beautifully executed matte blast, the nice thing is those edges are still well defined. Those crisp lines still look great, and they don't always show up like that on these types of finishes. So kudos to TUUL, especially on their first outing, for being able to really get this dialed in quite nicely. Ooh. And then, you know, we take away that and we still got some loom there, which this isn't, you know, again, it's not a dive watch. It's a field watch. And I think, you know, it absolutely does that job. I mean, honestly, from my time in the Marine Corps, we typically wanted the watches to be illegible in darkness because we didn't want to give away our position. Now, we'll go ahead and get the lights back on here. and figure out the closing thoughts. Okay, guys. I've been reviewing a lot of these types of watches recently, whether you think about field watches or just everyday adventure types. And it's great to see that kind of Dirty Dozen design aesthetic really start coming through and gaining more popularity today. I think it's a very balanced setup. Of course, you do have this low, setup in a no date configuration, so it's going to be very symmetrical, very balanced, and I think looks very, very good. So on the wrist, great proportions. It sits really nice and flat. In terms of model variants, it's also available with a black dial. So just like this, but with a black dial, right? And then, of course, the black index would be white, so reverse that, and it's going to have better lume and all that, too. So this one, though, I think daylight legibility really, really stands out because of that reverse layout. Now, you can also get it in a bronze case, like I mentioned earlier, kind of in the intro with the pricing, and you can get that with either a black or a green dial, which is, I think, pretty cool. And then your choice of black, khaki, or army green straps. And you're going to get matching steel or bronze hardware, which I think is really nice as well. Whoever they used for the straps here, I have to say, great supplier, because these are really nicely done in terms of the materials, the fit and the finish on there. The weave, it looks really nice and tight. The stitching looks great, and the hardware is nicely matched, which typically you don't always find. So I think that is nice that they went down to those little details. Now, in terms of comparable models, well, there are definitely more and more microbrand competitors joining the fray within this genre. I think something like the modern Vertex M100 at $2,700 is an interesting contemporary from an original Dirty Dozen manufacturer. So, I mean, I know there's always that thought of, well, if it's simple, if it's, a very basic layout, no crazy complications, no crazy finishes, I think there's always that kind of idea that, oh, that should be a cheaper watch. But, again, this is Swiss made. This is a smaller brand. So they're, sourcing everything in smaller batches, which means higher costs. So, for me, I think, the price point, although on the higher end at just underneath $900, I think it's justifiable for how clean this thing is executed. Also, the design aesthetic, of course, I think is quite handsome. But even their take and their little changes and choices of font, choices of color layouts, choices of different configuration layouts, I think it all plays very, very well. And it does elevate the watch just to feel a little bit more expensive and a little bit more modern and thoughtful and creative, which I think is nice. And that's one of the things where I think, of course, Vertex, they excel at, because theirs feels very, very modern, very robust. And, with that contemporary take, it's easier to kind of justify the price increase. Then you add into that the history and whatnot. Here, you're not going to have the same amount of history, but hey, everybody has to start somewhere. And I think TUUL watches started at a really, really great place. So for me, guys, bottom line, if you're looking for the most historically accurate Dirty Dozen watch, the Filthy 13th isn't that. But if you're looking for a Swiss-made, well-spec'd and executed, modern, general-purpose field watch, I think the Filthy 13 makes something like the Hamilton Khaki Field feel more than a bit underwhelming by comparison. And, I love the Hamilton. I have many Hamiltons, different variations, whether it's simple three-hand field or getting into some of their field chronographs, within that 38 millimeter space, and even the Murph, which I love. So I have to say, though, lay this next to any one of those watches, and this just feels like it's just a little bit punchier. And then, of course, as an enthusiast, having the screw down crown, the additional protection and confidence against water, I think that definitely goes a long way in making this feel more and more versatile. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys. Oh, wait, actually, before we cut, big shout out to TUUL Watches. Thank you guys for sending this piece over for me to share with my viewers. So again, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And even if you don't have a lot to think, just put an emoji down there for engagement. Thanks, guys.